Imagine being told for decades that your chronic, gnawing stomach pain is your own fault. It's because you're too stressed, you eat too much spicy food, or you just have a nervous disposition. For millions of people suffering from stomach ulcers, this wasn't just an assumption. It was the accepted medical consensus. Doctors, scientists, and pharmaceutical companies all agreed ulcers were a lifestyle disease. The treatment, bland diets, antacids, and a lot of try to relax. But what if this entire belief system, built over a century, was completely wrong? Today, we're diving into one of the most dramatic stories in modern medicine, a tale of stubbornness, scientific dogma, and two brave researchers who were willing to risk their careers to prove a truth that no one wanted to hear. This is the story of how a tiny, spiral-shaped bacterium toppled a medical empire and changed our understanding of the stomach forever. For the longest time, the human stomach was considered a fortress. Its environment is so incredibly acidic, like a vat of hydrochloric acid, that scientists believed nothing could possibly survive in there for long. This seemed logical. This powerful acid is what helps us break down food and kill off harmful germs we might swallow. So, when it came to stomach ulcers, which are essentially painful sores in the stomach lining, the explanation seemed obvious. The theory was called no acid, no ulcer. The idea was that an excess of stomach acid, often triggered by stress or diet, was burning holes in the stomach wall. The entire medical industry was built around this concept. Treatments focused on neutralizing the acid or reducing its production. It made perfect sense, and it was a billion-dollar industry. Anyone who dared to suggest otherwise was met with skepticism, if not outright ridicule. The fortress was impenetrable. End of story. But strange clues kept popping up, things that didn't quite fit the official narrative. As far back as the late 19th century, some researchers peering through microscopes had noticed curious spiral-shaped bacteria in the stomachs of animals and even some humans. They published their findings, but these reports were largely ignored, dismissed as contamination or irrelevant bacteria just passing through. The acid kills everything theory was just too powerful. Fast forward to the 1970s, and a pathologist in Australia named Robin Warren started noticing the same thing. While examining stomach biopsies from patients with gastritis, inflammation of the stomach lining, which often precedes ulcers, he consistently saw these small, curved bacteria clustered right on the surface of the stomach cells, especially in the inflamed areas. He was intrigued. The bacteria were always there when there was inflammation, and absent when the stomach lining was healthy. Was it a coincidence? Warren didn't think so. He believed these little organisms were not just innocent bystanders. They were causing the inflammation. But proving it was another story entirely. He was a pathologist, not a superstar researcher, and his observations went against everything the textbooks said. This is where a young, ambitious gastroenterology trainee named Barry Marshall enters the picture. In 1981, Marshall was looking for a research project and was paired with Warren. At first, Marshall was as skeptical as anyone. Bacteria living in the stomach. It sounded impossible, but he was fascinated by Warren's persistence and the clear pattern he had observed. Together, they decided to tackle the problem head-on. Their first major hurdle was simply growing the bacteria in a lab. If they couldn't isolate and culture it, they could never study it properly or prove it caused disease. They tried and failed for months. Every sample they took from a patient's stomach came up empty in the Petri dishes. It was incredibly frustrating. The scientific community was already dismissing their ideas, and their inability to grow the mystery bug wasn't helping. It seemed like their project was doomed. Then, a lucky accident changed everything. It happened over the Easter holiday in 1982. The lab technicians, in their rush to leave for the long weekend, forgot to throw out a set of culture plates from a recent biopsy. Usually, they would incubate plates for 2 days and then discard them if nothing grew. But this time, the plates were left in the incubator for a full 5 days. When the technicians returned to the lab on Tuesday morning, they found it. On the forgotten plates were tiny, transparent colonies. They had finally grown the elusive bacterium. It was a slow-growing organism, and the standard 2-day protocol was simply not long enough. They had been throwing out successful cultures all along without even knowing it. Now that they could grow it, they could study it. They named it Campylobacter pylori, later renamed Helicobacter pylori because of its spiral or helico shape. This was their smoking gun. They could now prove the bacteria was real. But the real battle had just begun. Armed with their discovery, Warren and Marshall tried to present their findings to the medical world. The reaction was brutal. They submitted their research to the Gastroenterological Society of Australia, and it was rejected. Reviewers called it a joke. When they presented at conferences, they were met with eye rolls and condescending questions. The establishment was completely invested in the stress-on-acid theory. Senior doctors told Marshall he was naive and that he was damaging his career. The idea that a simple germ could cause ulcers was seen as simplistic, almost childish. Think about it from their perspective. They had spent their entire careers treating ulcers based on the acid model. Pharmaceutical companies were making billions from antacid drugs like Zantac and Tagamet. Admitting that a bacterium was the real cause would mean they were all wrong, and the solution might be as simple as a course of antibiotics. It was a paradigm shift that no one was ready to accept. Barry Marshall was getting desperate. No one was taking him seriously. Animal studies were not convincing enough. He knew he needed to provide definitive proof. So, he decided to do something incredibly risky and, by today's standards, ethically unthinkable. He decided to use the ultimate guinea pig, himself. In 1984, after a baseline endoscopy confirmed his stomach was perfectly healthy, Marshall took a beaker filled with the cloudy broth of cultured Helicobacter pylori and drank it. For a few days, nothing happened. He thought maybe he was naturally immune, but then, about a week later, he started feeling ill. He became nauseous, started vomiting, and felt tired and unwell. His breath became terrible. He went back for another endoscopy. The results were shocking. His stomach lining, which had been pristine just days before, was now severely inflamed. He had acute gastritis, the precursor to an ulcer, and swarming all over the inflamed tissue was Helicobacter pylori. He had proven it. He had given himself the disease by swallowing the bacteria. Thankfully, his wife insisted he take antibiotics, which cleared up the infection and his symptoms. Marshall's self-experiment was the turning point. It was a dramatic, undeniable demonstration of cause and effect. It was hard to argue with a scientist who had deliberately infected himself to prove his point. Slowly, very slowly, the tide began to turn. Other researchers around the world started replicating their findings. More and more studies confirmed the link between H. pylori and gastritis, and then between H. pylori and the vast majority of stomach and duodenal ulcers. The evidence became overwhelming. Major institutions like the National Institutes of Health in the United States finally held a consensus conference in 1994, officially declaring that ulcers were an infectious disease caused by H. pylori and should be treated with antibiotics. The old stress and acid theory was completely discarded. Stress can certainly make symptoms worse, but the primary cause was now understood to be the bacterium. The fortress had been breached. The dogma was dead. The impact of this discovery was monumental. A chronic, recurring condition that could cause immense pain, bleeding, and sometimes even lead to surgery, was now curable. A simple 1 to 2 week course of antibiotics could eradicate the bacteria and heal the ulcers for good, preventing them from ever coming back. It saved millions of people from a lifetime of suffering and discomfort. It also saved healthcare systems billions of dollars. And the story doesn't end there. Further research linked chronic H. pylori infection to an increased risk of stomach cancer, one of the deadliest forms of cancer. By treating the bacterial infection, doctors could now also significantly reduce a person's risk of developing this terrible disease. It was a medical revolution, sparked by a forgotten petri dish and a scientist's courageous, if reckless, act of self-expression. In 2005, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for their discovery of the bacterium Helicobacter pylori and its role in gastritis and peptic ulcer disease. The rebels had become heroes. Their story is a powerful reminder of how science is supposed to work. It's not about clinging to old ideas, but about questioning, observing, and having the courage to challenge the status quo, no matter how entrenched it is. It shows that sometimes, the most groundbreaking discoveries come from the most unexpected places, not from a giant research institute, but from a humble pathologist and a determined young doctor who refused to take impossible for an answer. So next time you hear about a scientific consensus, remember the story of H. pylori. Remember that even the most solid-looking fortress of knowledge can be brought down by a single, persistent, spiral-shaped truth. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the amazing world of science and discovery. Let me know in the comments if you've heard this story before or if it is new to you. See you in the next video.